So today we're going to cover using the JavaScript debugger in PhpStorm/WebStorm. The IDE that I am using today is PhpStorm 6.0, but the steps that it takes to set up the JavaScript debug configuration is the same between PhpStorm as well as WebStorm. So let's get started. So the first thing you'll actually need, if you don't already have this set up for your PhpStorm or WebStorm, is the actual JetBrains extension. I have it set up here, but if you go to Chrome, extensions, you can actually search for JetBrains IDE support. And as you can see, I already have it installed, but you'll want to add this to your Chrome extensions. Now if you're using Firefox, it will actually install it for you when you try to do debug for the first time, when you set up the Firefox as your browser that you're using. So anyways, let's get started. What I'm going to do is fire up my application that I have. So I wrote a little debug quick application. It hits a JSON file that holds a JSON object for some data to go through, and it then in turn injects that into an application that I set up through Angular. So let me get that fired up. Alright. So I got that server fired up, have it pointed to port 3000. Anyway, so I'm going to open up my PhpStorm. And so it loads in the project that I have built. As you can see, I have my application, CSS. Here's that JSON object I was telling you guys about. In the JavaScript, I have my standard Angular setup with some controllers, service that handle the call to get the JSON data, the app, and the CommonJS, all that good stuff. So at the top here you have your tools bar, and what you'll notice is next to this bug and this play button there's this little drop down area. When you click on this, you have a setting for edit configurations. You want to click on that. It's going to open up a dialog box that has multiple things that you can set up or edit from here, but what we'll want to do is create a new one. So you'll notice that there's JavaScript debug here. When you click the plus button, it'll bring down a little drop down, and you have the same settings that you see here, and we'll want to pick JavaScript debug. And today what I'm going to show you is how to set up your remote. Now the remote is good because you can actually test production code if you have the setup, the file structure the same that is on production would be the same on your local system. You can actually debug a production box by pointing to that server. But what we're going to do is point to localhost itself to kind of show it hitting a remote server even though it is on your local box. So we're going to click on remote, and you have the options of naming this debug configuration. And what we're going to name it is localhost debug. And then we want to set the URL to open a browser page too. So my port number is actually port 3000, so I'm just going to do HTTP localhost port 3000, and I want to go to my app folder because that's where the index file is. And then here's the setting that you can actually pick the browser that you want to use to open up to. So if you're more comfortable with using Chrome, you can use Chrome as long as you have that extension installed. If you use Firefox, after you hit OK and apply and you first debug, it'll detect if the WebStorm or PhpStorm plugin is installed for Firefox. If not, it'll go out and install it for you. But we're going to use Chrome for this example. Now what you need to do is also point to where the files are going to be located. So all my JavaScript files that I care about on debug is going to be in my app directory. So in there you see all these files. So I'm going to set the app directory as the root, and then I want to point the URL to. So now if this was your production code, you'd point to your production URL, but here we're testing localhost, so we're going to set that up here. So we do HTTP localhost port 3000/app. Now this will point to this directory and will allow us to do some debugging. Alright, everything looks good. You can also run some tasks before launch, but we won't need to in this example. So hit apply, hit OK, and now you'll notice that you have your configuration here all set up. And this little bug is out now highlighted for you to actually click and start debugging. Now if you click this again, you'll know that you have your configuration here, so if you add more configurations, you can select the difference between those two and then add and play. So right now we don't have any breakpoints set, and we're gonna set some on my home JS, because this is an example of me going through this recipe JSON object. It just has some data in there. So I'm going to set a breakpoint on this and this, so we'll see what we get back when we start debugging. So I'm going to start the debug. It brings up the browser, and as soon as it brings up the browser and it hits the first breakpoint, we'll actually run into something that we broke. And now you'll see that it hit this get recipes, and then most likely it's coming from the injection right here. So we'll play through that. Now once we're in the method, this controller method, on the home, we'll see that it hit the scope, the title variable, and right now it's set to undefined. And if we step down into it, you'll see now that if you hover over the title variable, we actually get top recipes. Another thing you'll notice down here at the bottom is where the debug console actually is. You'll see you have variables here, and if you open this up, you'll see the scope here, and you'll see all the objects within the scope. So you have the parent scope, everything that's kind of tied into the scope for Angular, and you'll see the title here too. And then also you'll see we have a recipes object, and inside our recipe object we have a method for get recipes, and this is the actual method right here that we go into. So we go into it, we actually pull back data from this callback method. We get the data back from this get recipes method, and inside that data we have our two objects from the get recipes, which actually calls a get to this recipe JSON file. And so you actually see that we get our data back. We have an array of two objects, and in there we have one of the recipes, which is a blackened ribeye, and the other object, which is a cedar plank salmon. And you'll see, you can open this up, you can see all the properties that we have within that object. So we have the name, the category, prep time, cook time, all the ingredients, and that's an array of things as well. And then directions is an object that has the description, and then another array of the steps that it would take. So this really helps when you're working with data, especially when you're making calls to a database, or if you're making calls to an API service. You'll know the kind of data that you can work within, and at the same time you can kind of work, once you kind of know the object, you can actually work through it. So if you wanted to add something else, like scope dot recipe title, you could do data. You'd have to make a loop through it, but you could do like if you want to get the first item, data first item dot name. And so now if you step through that, you'll see that it's the blackened ribeye, right? So we're getting the first one, and we set the recipe title to blackened ribeye. Now you probably won't want to do this, but it's just kind of showing you an example that you can actually debug real time and actually work with the data real time. which is kind of cool. So I'm actually going to delete this because I don't want it in the code. And what I'm doing here is appending this data into my latest recipes. This is just for an example. And then what it does through Angular, if you guys have worked with Angular before, it takes that latest recipes object, and we can add it to this article, and we repeat it. So it's like a repeater. If you work with .NET, there's repeaters that you can use. Anyways, you repeat through it, and you set a variable that you can use to insert your properties in. So you have your image for the source, like we have a recipe name, we have the prep time, cook time. So we're pulling all these items out of the object and inserting it into the HTML. And then for arrays within the array of an object, you can do a repeater inside a repeater. So it's kind of cool. Anyways, we're going to play through all these, and once we're through, we'll look at our page and it actually spits everything out as we want it. So if there's ever any issues, the debugging really helps out, especially having it through IDE. Now you can debug through Chrome browser, there's some debugging that you can do through Firefox, but it's a little bit more robust through this through the PhpStorm and WebStorm IDE. So this was just a quick little tutorial on how you would set up your configuration. And in later videos I'm going to go through a little bit more advanced debugging techniques, as well as tying minification files into your dev files. Hope you enjoy. Thanks.